started on the recording for today too. So I hope that this was useful. You're welcome to hang on to what you've worked on for today and turn that in at the end of class. I also wanted to use some time today to go over, again, a quick bird's eye view of the remainder of the course, along with an update about the final day, and then also talking about the rubric for your final draft, which I've uploaded to Canvas. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is about the final exam day, and I know the availability issues that might have for you. So if you're looking on the schedule, right, as we talked about, we'll be shifting to Janet Chapter 9, an apology for reconciliation for Friday and the beginning of next week. And then the final chapter that we'll be getting into on December 8th is about organizations and families. And then on December 10th, again, is the opportunity to turn in the extra credit. You've been here before for most of you, and you kind of know how it works in moving to the final exam period, where we'll have a 2-hour block. Since there's no cumulative final exam in the class, I'm instead asking that this Thursday, December 16th, is a time to share basically what you've put together for your final essay. Since you're really close to turning that in by the end of the day, it'll be a chance to go through the remaining questions, and it's not going to be a formal presentation, instead an opportunity to, spend about 4 or 5 minutes talking about what you've put together for this assignment. So I bring this up because I have a couple questions come up from people who might be traveling and gone at the time that we have this final exam meeting, or are concerned about, leaving early for athletic events or other things that prevent them from being able to do that. So here's the deal that I'll give you. So this is a check down. If you can make it face-to-face on this time, so 1 to 3 on Thursday, December 16th, then please do that. If you cannot make it face-to-face, then I'll have a Zoom link, and we'll have you up here, and you'll share your 4 to 5 minutes through Zoom. You can do that remotely. If you can't do either of those, either face-to-face or through Zoom during that time, I ask that before this 1 to 3 time window, that you email me kind of a short 4 or 5 minute video where you're talking about the essay, the process of developing that, and so on, and then I'll share that video during that time period for other folks in the class to see too. So the check down is, if you can make it face-to-face, please do. If you can't do that, you can use the Zoom link, and if you're not able to make that either, then send us a video beforehand. Again, I'm not asking for a formal presentation. I just want to know your topic and give you the opportunity, as a kind of nice and a little bit more relaxing way to finish up the course, the opportunity to share the work that you've been putting in this quarter. So just know that that's coming up on the horizon in terms of remaining assignments and how that final exam day will be shaping. So I wanted to go over some more details about this final draft, right? So the final draft is about 3,000 words. Some people were mentioning that, maybe the word count wasn't corresponding to the page numbers on the rough draft, like 1,000 was a little bit hard, or 2,000 was what I wrote in the rough draft, and maybe you're having difficulties with 4 pages corresponding to that amount. So 3,000 words should be what you're shooting for here in this final draft. One thing that I noticed, and we'll get to in just a minute, is that many of the rough drafts actually were in that page minimum for the final draft. So if you've already written a lot of content, then generally for this final draft, it's about revising, cutting out, changing, and incorporating some new content into that. If you're well under that minimum for the final draft, that's okay. You'll be able to have the opportunity to expand on some of these ideas and concepts for that draft. So, the thing to remember here, right? Your final draft is not just making a few grammatical corrections. I'm asking for a pretty substantial revision in terms of content. That's why, kind of as the warm-up prompt for today, I asked you to look at a couple citations from outside the textbook to credible scholarly publications. So these could be within communication studies. So there's journals such as Environmental Communication, Organizational Communication, Journal of Applied Communication, and a lot of those, they're specific. But you might look outside of communication as well to things such as sociology, geography, history, and so on. If you're having trouble with coming up with those outside sources to incorporate, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I also want to direct you to a couple ways that you can integrate some searches for some of these as well. And then remember that I'm asking you to incorporate at least 5 major concepts that we've talked about in chapters 6 through 10 of the textbook. Again, that gets at the role of things like online dispute resolution that we talked about on Monday. Could also get into things related to negotiation, mediation, issues of aggression and bullying in conflict management, as well as things such as organizational conflict management approaches. So you'll notice the rubric is available on the front page of Canvas. It looks fairly similar to the previous rubric, but it is worth several more points, and it does have some additional components that I'm looking at. So again, go to the front page. The rubric is listed here. So the rubric is essentially adding a check down of different elements, such as the inclusion of your, I'm just going to go ahead and directly download that for you. So it includes a few other components, such as the inclusion of at least 2 outside sources, 5 major concepts from the back half of the textbook, and again, some of the things I'm asking for before in terms of organization, structure, and so on. So as far as that final draft goes, again, it's worth 250 points, or 25% of your grade. You already have that baseline through the rough draft, so I recommend that you use this final draft to expand on some of those ideas and explore them a little bit further. So the way that I provided feedback on your rough draft, right, is that you have the score. It's out of 100 points. So the score is the percentage that you got on the paper. And then in addition to that, you should have seen an attached docx, and the attachment contains essentially a full breakdown of the score that you received on the different sections of the assignment, along with some general comments and suggestions on where you might go for a revision. If you have questions or concerns about the grade that you got, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you about that. So I want to talk through some of the things that I think went well, and you should continue to do with the final draft, and a few things that I would recommend changing or revising or fixing up a little bit. First of all, I really like that for many of you, you were able to choose topics that I think connected pretty well to some of your interests. There were a lot of topics that I really didn't know much about at all, and was able to learn through the drafts and work you presented. Things such as logging in Eastern Oregon, the way that individuals who drive trucks are being tracked electronically for records, topics such as the building of telescopes on indigenous land in Hawaii. These were really cool topics, and I think overall, folks did a really good job of both selecting good topics and also explaining them to people in a way that made a lot of sense. I also thought in general, the writing clarity and conventions were pretty good, right? There weren't generally big grammatical or textual errors, and I think that overall your writing was really clean and easy to follow. And then I think that there was a good level of appropriate tone too. Again, you've been kind of through some college writing before at this point, and so I appreciated that you were able to approach these topics in a professional way. And since this is a writing-focused course, I do want to talk about some specific things that I recommend that you work on and improve on as we get to the final draft. So the biggest issue that I noticed that was present in an unfortunate chunk of the papers was about using consistent source citation, both through in-text citations as well as through the works cited page. So there were some folks that just got it down and did a really great job. But there were a few trends that I noticed that I recommend working on. One of the biggest ones, right, is that whenever you're quoting from something that is not common knowledge, right, or not something that draws from your personal experience, for instance, maybe you're quoting a fact or statistic about the quantity of an endangered species. Unless you've got that memorized, that's like an outside piece of information that you're still going to want to cite, right? So you want to do that both through an in-text citation and a works cited list. When in doubt, cite. When there's a piece of information that you're not really sure is your own or from an outside source, you should cite it. Remember that citing a source in text is not just when you're directly quoting. It's also when you're paraphrasing and capturing the argument in your own words. So there were some rough drafts where the source citations were incomplete, or I was missing an in-text citation where it should be. There were also some cases where Jant wasn't cited either in text or through the works cited list. As a reminder, you need to cite from the Jant textbook in addition to some other sources. There were a few essays where sometimes there were some ideas that were brought up related to conflict management, such as negotiation, conflict resolution, and other topics like that. But those terms were just kind of said and not really defined or explained super well. So one thing that I recommend that you do is go into this assignment thinking about somebody that doesn't know the details or the specifics about some of the terms that you're using. So for instance, right, single issue numerical bargaining might be an idea that you bring up on your topic. You might define it using a quotation or passage from Jant and explain that it's about, right, a single issue that is defined using numbers, so something like a cost of an item. And then now that you've had that clear definition, you can have a much cleaner application and connection to your case study. So, in other words, really making sure that you define terms and concepts that you're using is both helpful for us as readers to understand and follow along, but it's also helpful for you because when you have a clearer definition, you can turn to that definition as you're doing analysis. So for instance, maybe you know that single issue numerical bargaining is a problem because there can be things such as, you know, having an outlandish offer, having difficulty reaching a compromise point or something like that. Since you've established that in your definition, you have a lot more to work with and draw from in the essay itself. So using good quotations and passages in your source citation is a great way to add on content to your essay. Don't use long block quotations if they're not relevant to your essay, of course. But quoted material and paraphrased material can help you have more to use. So organization was another thing that I noticed as an issue to continue to work on. So some of the essays that I worked through had some good content, but were fairly informational, right? They went through and described the issue and some of the parties that might be involved in the conflict, and I would get to kind of the second or even the third page and I'd be like, okay, how is this connecting to issues in conflict management? So my advice is that within the first page or so, you include something like a really clear preview sentence that goes over the major ideas in conflict management that you're exploring for the topic, right? So maybe you start in your introductory paragraph and you provide a little bit of context. Maybe you say, you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened in this date under the Kennedy administration, so on and so on and so on. In this essay, we will explore the issues of groupthink as well as the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement to better understand this conflict. That way, you're concluding the paragraph with a preview that helps the readers clearly understand where you're going. One model that I noticed in a couple essays that worked really well is something that you could choose to use, is dividing up your essay into headings or subsections, where you pick a specific concept or idea in conflict management that you're choosing to apply or use. That's a great way to go about it. Another model that you could use is to kind of look at a kind of time orientation. So maybe you say, we'll start by understanding the beginnings of this conflict, the ways that the conflict has evolved over time, and the ways that the conflict was eventually resolved. So that'd be a way that you could help with organization too. In other words, I recommend cutting down on background information if it's going longer than a single page, and guiding the reader more explicitly through what it is that you're applying and using in your essay. And then the third thing that I recommend is that you're using specific concepts from the text in a way that's clear, right? So that's something that, again, by quoting and explaining what the terms are, you're able to have a link between those two. So for instance, Multi-issue negotiation is XYZ. We see multi-issue negotiation in this college admissions scandal because of XYZ. So putting those two things together helps a lot. And then there were a couple essays where the topic is good, but because the topic is broad, there's less to draw from and use. So as a good rule of thumb, if you're picking a topic that's like a national scope or international scope, you might try to focus it in a specific location. So for instance, deforestation and renewable energy. That's a big topic. If you're focusing on that in the western United States, or in the state of Oregon, or even in eastern Oregon. By having focus, it's a lot easier for you to find those outside sources that can be used to develop your ideas in a little bit more detail. Again, I thought the rough drafts were good and definitely headed in the right direction. You know, the average rough draft was definitely in the solid B range. But these are some ways that you can expand on that, make your topic a little bit more focused, and again, have a cleaner connection to some ideas in the course. And again, when it comes to outside sources, things such as JSTOR, Google Scholar, and EOU Library are really great places to start. So we kind of went through a little bit more about the final draft assignment. We talked about OER in our last class, and some of the applications and issues, right, such as Fire Festival, where ODR, of course, does not work very well. We've gone through some more details about preparation for the final draft and research. There's a couple other resources that I want to guide you to that will help you in that research process. So again, the JSTOR text analyzer is actually a really great resource when it comes to looking at sources. And an easy way to do this is actually if you take some of the components of your rough draft. For instance, you could take an entire paragraph from your rough draft, paste it into the analyzer, and then you would suddenly have a bunch of sources that would be a really good fit. So if you go to jstor.org/analyze, or you search JSTOR text analyzer, what you could do is paste in or attach your entire rough draft. You could also use a snippet you choose to paste into here too. And basically what it does, right, is it uses the keywords or similar phrases, what you have, and finds a list of scholarly sources that would link well to the topic. So as an example, I might just do a really short sentence where I may say something such as, issue of deforestation within the western United States. And again, it can take a lot of text and identify a lot of different things using that. So it runs through a search of scholarly articles that might be connected. Also, right, you have JSTOR access through EOU, so you should be able to access and download PDFs from many of these topics. So one of the cool things here is when you do the search, right, it has prioritized terms. You can even alter the slider. So if you say, you know what, deforestation is really important, you can change through the slider up here. Maybe tropical deforestation is not a thing. You should move it over here. And country music has nothing to do with your topic, so you move it over here. And then it'll change the results that show up for you, right? So as a result of that, you can run another search and understand a little bit more. So again, there's a lot of ways that you can find some extra articles and maybe leaf through those as a way of developing this a little bit further. I also have a list of a lot of journals in communication studies, since that's what I do. So I'm happy to send along, and I can upload through Canvas some of the communication journals, many of which you can access through EOU if you're looking for some additional sources. So I think JSTOR Text Analyzer is really cool, really helpful. Google Scholar, of course, has a lot of really easy sources that you can access. Some of them are a little bit paywalled. One thing that you've probably noticed if you've done similar types of resources or similar types of research in the past, is this idea of an abstract. How many folks are familiar with an abstract in like a journal article? Yeah. So an abstract, right, is essentially the TLDR, too long didn't read, of a journal article. It tells you in about 200 or 300 words what the article is about. So what issue is it exploring, and what are some of the key findings or observations that emerged from that study. So that's a really good way that you can avoid reading the entire thing and instead have a brief description that explains to you why this matters and whether or not it would be a good fit. Again, EOU library and some on-campus resources are really helpful too. When it comes to citing sources in general, right, one of the big issues, again, one challenge, especially in the last few years that's been talked about a lot, is the issue of source credibility, right? There's been a lot of concerns about like fake news or information that's not credible. James Gunn in a textbook on public speaking outlines, I think, a good way of thinking about source credibility. It can help you in figuring out if what you found is a good source. And that's the 3 hecks. First is who the heck wrote it, right? So who is the author? What is their credibility or background? So one thing that's useful is maybe in your rough draft you said, according to Simon Johnson, XYZ. And I think to myself, cool. Who is Simon Johnson? What is his credibility or background? You might say, Simon Johnson, an expert and associate professor of environmental communication at the University of Oregon, writes XYZ. So figuring out what the background is from your source is a really good starting point. Who are they? Where are they coming from? And one really cool thing is that as you're understanding your source a little bit better and who they are, you can also better understand and find other things that they might have written or co-authored with, and you can go down an entire rabbit hole of additional sources that come from that single source as a starting point. Who the heck paid for it is another key idea here too, right? Is it an academically published journal, or is it something like a partisan news outlet that clearly has a stake in their opinion on the topic? I think people did a pretty good job of avoiding too much bias in the sources that they brought in. And when was it published? Older sources can be useful to establish history and context, but you might use a more contemporary source if you feel like it's a better way to support the key arguments that you want to advance in your paper. So those are some things that you could think about too in terms of what outside sources that you're choosing to bring in. And one thing I recommend is just giving yourself the opportunity to explore, right? It's a lot of fun to look through outside sources and find the ones that really jump out to you or seem especially interesting or relevant to your project. So those are the major things that I wanted to go over in relationship to this project here. And then after that, I want to talk a little bit more about ODR and do a little activity that connects back to some of the things that we brought up on Monday. So you might recall online dispute resolution is about using things such as technology and information that's distributed online in order to deal with conflict as it comes up. OER is a pretty common practice. In fact, right, people might be using online settings as a way of dealing with potential conflict issues in a way that might move from face-to-face to online, or it could be a conflict that's entirely done online. Either way, it's possible that your topic for your paper could have an online component, especially if it's a conflict that's been discussed for the past year and a half. There's a good chance that there's some level of online mediation or dispute resolution, as a lot of the elements of this conflict have had to go virtual. So you might think about how the shifts toward online settings with COVID have impacted a greater and more holistic understanding of the issue. As I mentioned before, right, ODR can be a challenge because of all of the nonverbal communication that we do. It's up to 93% of our communication every day. So all the things such as our tone of voice, our use of gestures, mannerisms, and so on, might not translate as well to something like a phone call or an email or the use of something like Zoom or FaceTime. So it's important for us to think about how we can compensate for some of these challenges when we're communicating online. So what I'd like you to do now is kind of picking up on where we left off from Monday on ODR. What I'd like you to do is find a group of other people, maybe these could be the people that you worked with in the beginning of class today to discuss your ideas going into the final paper. And I'd like you to talk about a situation in which online communication might be used to resolve or deal with conflict. It could be an example in your own lives, it could be an example that you see through media. And then I want you, once you've established that, to talk about how that conflict might have gone down differently if it happened face-to-face. So let's just kind of think about the role that online settings have with conflict. So it could be a personal example, or it could be an example of conflict that you're familiar with, like one connected to your topic, where conflict happened. So you're welcome to return to your partnership or group and take some time to share some of the things that come up for you when you think about conflict happening online.